It has now been 4.5 days since someone, undoubtedly the Ukrainians, did a bomb attack on the Kerch Strait Bridge, which is the bridge that connects the mainland of Russia to the southeastern point of the Crimean Peninsula. It is Russia's only reliable rail connection to the southern front. There are rail connections in the eastern part of Ukraine that do end into the west, but they all are reliant on a single transfer station up near the river at Zaporizhzhia, and so they're well within short range missile fire and rocket fire from the Ukrainians. So the Russians have not used that route because the trains kept getting blown up. Kerch, however, is completely out of the range of almost all weapons that are in play in the theater. It's certainly everything the Ukrainians have. And it's not until equipment on the trains gets all the way past Crimea and is actually approaching Kherson City before it comes into range of Ukrainian weapons. This has been allowing the Russians to disgorge equipment and men very close to the front lines for the last 5 months of the war. Now, with Kerch offline, and it looks like it's going to be offline for an extended period of time, they only today removed the destroyed rail cars from the fuel train that got blown up when the bomb went off. And it looks like at least one of the tracks is warped beyond any sort of easy replacement. So replacing the tracks on the section that was completely damaged is going to be a month or two process. Undoubtedly, we also had warping and melting and re-solidification in the rebar and the concrete. So it's entirely possible, but both rail lines that go across the bridge are going to be offline for an extended period of time. But let's assume best case scenario here. Let's assume that the Russians are able to rip up the rails, put up new rails, and that there was no damage to the rebar and the structure of the bridge itself. Unlikely, but let's assume that. It's going to be about a 3-week process. In that time, the Russians need to reroute logistics. Now, there is a 2-lane section of the Kerch Bridge that is still operational, so they can still move things by truck. And there is the option of ferries operating that can go to terminals. And then, of course, there's options of going through eastern and southern Ukraine direct as opposed to going through Crimea. But none of these are good options. There's all kinds of restrictions. Ammo, men, but fuel is by far the biggest one. Fuel is bulky and it takes up a lot of weight and space in any transport medium. And a single cistern car in a truck can transport more fuel than 3 of those giant liquids transport trucks that we see on American highways, which are not what the Russians use. They use ones that are about 1/3 that size. So you're talking about a 6-to-1 ratio just in terms of the volume. And of course, those trucks use an order of magnitude more fuel to move this stuff than a train would. So you're losing a lot on the way. There's also a distance issue. Right now, most of the fuel is coming primarily from the refining and port town of Novorossiysk, which is fairly close to the eastern side of the Kerch Bridge. Otherwise, you're going to have to go to Vrenza or Samara, or if you're lucky, Belgorod, which is further away, and you then have to go through either Donetsk or Luhansk or both before going north of Mariupol into Mariupol, and now you're completely within range of multiple Ukrainian weapon systems before you can eventually do a dogleg over to Kherson. So you're talking about a trip that instead of a day by train is a week or more by a combined road rail system, because you also have to do an offloading of your train at some point. Otherwise, they're just going to blow up the cistern. The trucks at least have the option of being able to use back roads. And then, of course, there are active insurgencies going on in almost that entire route. So one Javelin is more than enough to take out a fuel truck, and these are civilian fuel trucks because the Russians don't have a military truck fleet anymore. So a Javelin might be overkill. An RPG would be plenty. Small arms fire could do it. So you're dealing with complications here to the war effort for the Russians that are an order of magnitude more complicated than they were. And even if they started redirecting everything already, it's going to be at least another week or two before the first of those fresh supplies from rerouted supplies ultimately make it to the front where they need to be used. Which means even in the best case scenario for the Russians here, the Ukrainians have a window of at least a couple of weeks where any equipment they destroy, any fuel tanks they destroy, cannot be replaced. And if the Ukrainians are going to make a push, now's really the time to do it. Now, if it turns out that this assessment is wrong and Kerch Bridge gets repaired in short order, then that means that the window has closed very, very quickly. But judging from the damage, that is not going to happen this month. Probably not next month either.
Everything that the Russians were bad at before. Propaganda, logistics, precision, training, maintenance, equipment. everything that they were bad at before, they're worse now. The Russian offensive has stalled pretty much everywhere. Ukraine has shifted the type of war that it is fighting. They've gone from predominantly trying to arrest the Russian advance with things like Stingers and javelins, shoulder-mounted weapons, to an ever-increasing number and ever-increasing style, heavier artillery. That has enabled Ukraine to increasingly strike deep behind enemy lines, blow up ammo dumps, destroy logistical hubs, damage infrastructure, and even get to the point of assassinating military leadership. Some of the Wagner bases, these are Russia's mercenaries, have been just destroyed. In other places, they've found out that a number of officers were getting together for a happy hour and they hit the bar. The degree to which the Ukrainians are able to put targeting information either from their own human network or signal intelligence that is provided by the Americans and put it to use has been very impressive. And it has snarled the entirety of the Russian advance in both the east and the south. Second, and perhaps even a little bit more significantly than the Ukrainian increasing battle prowess, is that Russia may be running out of ammunition. Now, the Russians don't fight wars like most modern militaries, certainly not like the United States. The United States does high-impact, long-range, deep penetration to prevent the front from ever even forming. That's not how the Russians do it. The Russians use trains to supply a nearly bottomless supply of materiel and fuel and ammo to the front line, and then they assault the entire front line with a massive amount of artillery, destroying everything they see in their path and incrementally advancing maybe a mile a day.